Today I will tell you the story of an old mother and her sick child. In a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Kentucky, there lived a woman named Ruth. She was an old woman, frail and thin, with weathered skin and hands that had seen years of hard work. But there was one thing that never seemed to change about Ruth: the love she had for her son, Jack. Jack had been born when Ruth was in her 30s, and from the moment he entered the world, he was the light of her life. Ruth and Jack lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was home. Jack had always been a curious child, full of energy and laughter. He loved to explore the forests near their home, climb trees, and run through the fields, always coming back home with a new adventure to share. Ruth would sit on the porch waiting for him to return, her heart swelling with pride and love for the boy who had filled her life with so much joy. But when Jack was 12 years old, everything changed. It started with a simple cold, something Ruth thought would pass in a few days. But as the days turned into weeks, Jack's health continued to deteriorate. He grew weaker and weaker, his once vibrant energy replaced by fatigue. His cough became persistent, and his breathing grew labored. Ruth, desperate for answers, took Jack to the local doctor, where they received news that would forever alter their lives. Jack had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of leukemia. The news hit Ruth like a ton of bricks. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. How could this be happening? How could the boy she had raised with so much love and care, the boy who had been the center of her world, be so sick? She felt helpless, lost, and devastated. But Ruth was a fighter. She had spent her life working hard to make ends meet, never backing down from a challenge. And now she would do everything in her power to save her son. The treatments were grueling. Jack underwent chemotherapy, radiation, and countless other procedures, each one leaving him weaker than the last. Ruth never left his side, spending every waking moment by his hospital bed, holding his hand and telling him stories to keep his spirits up. She would sit by him at night, her heart aching as she watched him struggle to sleep, his body racked with pain. There were times when Ruth didn't think she could go on. The exhaustion, the fear, the helplessness, it all weighed heavily on her, but every time she looked at Jack, she found the strength to keep going. His eyes, though clouded with pain, still held a glimmer of hope. He wanted to fight, and so did she. As the months passed, Ruth's own health began to deteriorate. She had always been a strong woman, but the years of caregiving were starting to take their toll. Her body, already aged, was worn down from the constant stress. Her hands trembled, her back ached, and her eyes grew tired. Yet she never once thought of resting. She couldn't. Jack needed her more than ever. One evening, as Ruth sat by Jack's hospital bed, she could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She had just come from a meeting with the doctors, who had told her that Jack's chances of recovery were slim. The chemotherapy wasn't working. The cancer had spread. Ruth didn't know how much longer her son could fight. She looked at Jack, who was lying in bed, his face pale and his body frail. His eyes were closed, but she could see the tears at the corners of his eyelids. He was trying so hard to be brave, but Ruth could see the fear in his heart. "Mom," Jack whispered, his voice weak. Am I going to die? Ruth's heart broke. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, brushing away the tears that had escaped from his eyes. No, sweetheart, she said softly. You're going to get better. I won't let you go. But deep down, Ruth knew that the battle they were fighting was one they might not win. She had spent so many sleepless nights praying, hoping, wishing for a miracle. But as the days passed and Jack's condition worsened, Ruth began to accept the harsh reality. She could no longer deny it. Her son was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Jack's condition worsened. Ruth found herself making preparations. She called the family to visit, knowing that the time they had left with Jack was growing short. She watched as her friends and relatives came and went, offering words of comfort that didn't seem to make a difference. Ruth appreciated their kindness, but nothing could ease the pain in her heart. Jack's once bright eyes now seemed distant. He no longer smiled, no longer laughed. The energy that had once filled their home was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness that hung in the air. Ruth tried to keep things normal for him, bringing him his favorite books, telling him stories. But it was clear that Jack was tired. He was tired of the endless treatments, the hospital visits, the needles, the pain. He was tired of fighting. One day, as Ruth sat by Jack's side, she noticed that he was struggling to breathe. His chest rose and fell unevenly, and his face was contorted in pain. Ruth called for the nurse, who came rushing in. The nurse checked Jack's vitals and then looked at Ruth with sad eyes. I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do, the nurse said softly. He doesn't have much time left. Ruth's heart shattered. She had known this day was coming, but hearing those words out loud felt like a knife to her chest. She held Jack's hand tightly, feeling the life slipping away from him. She couldn't imagine life without him. She had always been his protector, his caregiver, and now she was powerless to save him. That evening, Ruth sat beside Jack, her hand resting gently on his. She had always been strong for him, but now, as she watched him slip further away, she couldn't hold back her tears. She let them fall freely, her sobs filling the quiet room. Jack, weak as he was, opened his eyes and looked at her. There was a sadness in his gaze, but also something else, love. He reached out and placed his hand on hers. I love you, Mom, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ruth squeezed his hand, her heart breaking. I love you too, Jack. You've made me so proud. Jack smiled faintly, the smallest of smiles, but it was enough. It was enough for Ruth to know that, despite everything, she had given him all the love she could, and that was all that mattered. Later that night, as Ruth sat by Jack's side, she felt his grip loosen. She knew that he was slipping away, but she couldn't bring herself to let go. She held on to him, unwilling to accept the truth. But eventually, as the minutes stretched into hours, Ruth felt Jack's hand fall limp in hers. She knew then that he was gone. The silence in the room was deafening. Ruth sat there for a long time, not knowing what to do or where to go. She had lost her son, the one person she had dedicated her entire life to. She had failed to save him, and the weight of that failure crushed her. But as she sat there, tears streaming down her face, Ruth realized something. She hadn't failed Jack. She had given him all the love and care she had. She had fought for him with everything she had. And in the end, that was all she could do. Her love for him had been unwavering, and that was what truly mattered. The next morning, after Jack had passed, Ruth walked outside and stood in the yard. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and for the first time in a long while, Ruth felt a sense of peace. She knew her son was gone, but she also knew that the love they had shared would never die. It would live on in her heart and in the memories of the boy who had been her everything. The lesson from the story of Ruth and Jack, is a heartbreaking tale of love, loss, and the immense sacrifice that comes with being a parent. It is a story that illustrates the depths of a mother's love and the lengths she is willing to go to for her child. Ruth spent every day of Jack's illness caring for him, holding his hand through the worst moments of his life. She put aside her own needs and desires to make sure Jack had everything he needed, even when it seemed like the world was slipping away from them. But perhaps the most poignant lesson from this story is that love is not always enough to change the course of life. No matter how much Ruth wanted to save her son, she could not. The disease that took Jack away was something beyond her control. And yet, despite her inability to save him, Ruth's love for Jack was still a gift, one that Jack carried with him until the very end. This story is a reminder that life is fragile, and that no matter how much we wish we could protect those we love, there are things beyond our control. But even in the face of the hardest challenges, love remains a constant. It is what gives us the strength to keep going when all seems lost. And it is what helps us find peace even when we face the most devastating losses. In the end, Ruth's love for Jack was enough. It was enough to give him comfort in his final days, enough to help him feel loved and cherished even as he struggled. And that, more than anything, is what truly matters.